I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
There's a lot of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
My mind was blown when I realized how much society condones lies perceived to benefit women, in particular, perjury in intimate partner and sexual violence cases. Then I heard arguments that conviction rates based on those lies prove that men are malevolent, and I said, what is this shit? This particular manifestation of the accountability gap has come up in all of the previous week's discussions. A common thread that runs through the entire body of gender issues involving conflict between men's interests and women's interests, social and even legal tolerance when a woman lies. At the social end of this issue is, as always, the underlying gynocentric tendency of people in general to view women and their behavior through rose-colored glasses. Various sources report that both sexes exhibit this bias. A 1991 review of 300 college students by Alice H. Eagley, Antonio Medinick, and Stacy Otto found strong evidence that women are evaluated more favorably than men. A series of 4 experiments done by Lori A. Redmond, Ph.D. of Rutgers, and Stephanie A. Goodwin, Ph.D. of Purdue University, and reported on in 2004 in their paper Gender Differences and Automatic In-Group Bias, Why Do Women Like Women More Than Men Like Men, found that women are 5 times more likely to show favoritism for women than men are to show favoritism for men. Among other things, both sets of researchers measured respondents' tendency to attribute words viewed as positive based on gender, and found that both more readily assign them to women than to men. Both also found that both sexes associated violence or aggression with men. This combination of biases is an obvious contributing factor to the phenomenon of automatic belief when a woman accuses a man of any kind of abuse. Clues to the modern prevalence of gynocentrism in human perspectives throughout history can be found on gynocentrism.com, run by Peter Wright. In his article, Timeline of Gynocentric Culture, he provides evidence that while isolated gynocentric acts and events may predate the time period, it was in the Middle Ages that gynocentric perspectives and attitudes became a cultural norm. From his article Gynocentrism 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and the graphic provided in the post Gynocentric Culture Complex, one can find its genesis in a nexus of developing aristocratic practices, including the transformation of chivalry from a strict manly art of war to include a code for romantic lovers. Gynocentric norms attach discomfort to removing those rose-colored glasses and encumber any inclination toward skepticism regarding female complaints with malaise. Rather than confront the possibility that a woman is wrong or lying about having been victimized, the typical response is sympathy, validation, efforts at offering comfort, and problem-solving. Often, women relating their complaints take offense at even the appearance of skepticism, such as police questioning regarding details of a crime, even when those details may help convict the perpetrator. Women's advocates have expanded on this, pushing for law and policy that accommodates accusers whether the accusation is true or not, and hinders the defense of the accused in order to protect accusers from the perceived abuse of due process. Then, they use the resulting increases in conviction rates as supposedly justifying evidence. Look, they argue, look how many men are convicted. How does this not convince you that these women's complaints are valid? What am I talking about? Law, policy, and the courts all tolerate women lying about paternity, father involvement, harassment, all aspects of family violence, income and wealth distribution in property disputes, especially in divorce, and the woman's reasons for committing a crime, especially when the woman blames a man for her actions. Society tolerates women's advocates lying about all of the above. In addition, women's advocates lie about the nature and causes of income and circumstance disparity between the sexes. They falsely represent men as far more capable of fending for themselves than women under those circumstances. They lie about the characteristics of masculinity, in part by gendering dysfunction, and then generalizing it to all men. They support this lie by basing their promulgations on the premise that women's misandry defines masculinity. They falsely gender perceptions of criminal behavior. Then, they fight for leniency for female criminality under the pretense that men and masculinity are to blame for women's crimes. Then they use conviction rates as evidence to further gender and generalize perceptions of criminal behavior and how the individual is defined by his actions. Women's advocates' lame excuses for law and policy which mandates condoning female liars are filled with circular reasoning. They claim false accusation is rare, use the argument that it is rare to excuse presuming the majority of accusations true, use that standard to limit statistical documentation of false accusations to only those proved false beyond a shadow of a doubt, and then cite that documentation as proof that false accusation is rare. They ignore or outright deny the impact of the accusation on the life of the accused. Then, they claim the accused crime is worse than the lie, and then ignoring the fact that if the accusation is a lie, there was no crime, they falsely pit the welfare of violent crime victims against potential consideration for victims of false accusers. Then that false comparison is used to minimize the experiences of the accused, and in turn, that is used to bolster denial of the accusation's impact. They claim that if a man has nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear from being investigated and potentially tried because of a woman's lie, based on the supposition that the truth will come out. Then, they operate on the belief that a woman's perception defines reality, and in particular, a man's attitude, intent, and actions. They advocate as if skepticism toward accusations and holding liars accountable will intimidate real victims into silence. They treat evidence standards and due process standards as abuse and demand that society, law enforcement, and the judicial system listen and believe when a woman accuses a man. They've chipped away at the process of fair and balanced investigation and hearing, and are now using the resulting bias to claim it's proved that fair and balanced processes deny victims access to justice and put them at risk of censure. Then, they treat the result of these built-in biases as evidence that women never lie about intimate partner and sexual violence. They cannot answer the question, if having nothing to hide means having nothing to fear, why should real victims fear anything in response to liars being exposed and facing censure? When confronted with objections, women's advocates use logic fallacies and more lies as a bludgeon to try to force tolerance for lying on women's behalf. They ignore, deny, or abuse into compliance any women who don't subscribe to their victim narrative, then treat doubting the word of women's advocates, individually or as a group, as an accusation that all women, for whom they presume to speak, are lying. They treat skepticism toward their claims regarding prevalence, dynamics, or other characteristics of a problem, or disagreement with their proposed solutions to a problem, as an act of denying the entire problem and, in particular, its impact on women and women's right to seek relief. One manifestation of this is the treatment of skepticism of hysterical exaggerations of the prevalence of female victimhood as if the doubter approves of victimizing women. They use feminism's social science practice of lax vetting of research that supports the victim narrative as a body of manufactured evidence. This usually involves citing a body of often self-referring or circularly and often incorrectly referring academic research and writing. Then, the prevalence and scope of the lie are treated as evidence of its presumed validity. The lie has been officially told and expanded on by a lot of academics and advocates. It is therefore an accepted fact. They use gendered ad hominem, attempts to demonize skepticism toward claims about women's issues by treating association of it with masculinity as a disqualifying factor, under the claim that men's lack of female experience makes them ignorant of the nature of the issue and therefore unable to comment on it. This is then used to treat such skepticism as if it is, by nature, an ignorant act. Then there's when they think equality is a bad thing. They treat equal consideration of male experience of an issue women's advocates call a women's issue as an attack on sympathy for women, openly considering compassion for men misogyny. When that leads to less discussion of male experiences, they treat that as evidence that such experiences are more rare or less impacting. An approach I think of as zero-sum guys involves treating objection to generalization of outlying dysfunctional behavior among men to all men as a somehow wrongful effort to absolve all men, including the dysfunctional, of accountability for themselves. Any resulting arguments are treated as evidence of lack of accountability among men. An approach I've labeled zero-sum nerve treats any acknowledgement that women can also engage in dysfunctional behavior and highlighting incidents of it as a generalization of dysfunctional behavior and characteristics to all women, while ignoring any dysfunction in men. This attitude is displayed in support of considering any criticism of any woman's behavior misogyny. What the hell really is this shit? These advocates' arguments are a mess, clogging up the gender issues debate and hindering any real progress. It's like standing in the middle of a mass of debris from a natural disaster, trying to figure out where to begin. My answer is this. Here, have a shovel. It's time to take out the trash. Hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 21, Liar Liar, Accountability Gap Exposed. Just a reminder, if you want to join the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Live Streams channel. And if YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and on Facebook. My cleanup crew tonight consists of that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and Woozle Slayer Karen Strong. And that's the truth. Without further embellishment, let's get this shit show started. I've seen women's perjury with impunity force men through years-long ordeals in a hellish mix of family and criminal court. Karen, I know you have some stories as well, and they've been listening to my big mouth for over 10 minutes. Got a shovel?
Oh God, where do you even start? Like I can list off a whole bunch of cases. Jian Gomeshi's case was just an absolute fucking nightmare shit show of 3 women who, two of them at least, perjured themselves on the stand in the courtroom, and the third had at least perjured herself in her sworn statement to police. And then after she heard the media reports of the first 2 complainants getting completely obliterated on the stand based on their lies, at the 11th hour, the night before she was scheduled to testify, she went up to the prosecutor and said, if I actually went on another date with him and like gave him a hand job, and didn't bother telling police any of that, would that be something that you would like to know? So, I mean, like, it was just absolutely, absolutely absurd. I would recommend Diana Davison's videos on the Jian Ghomeshi case. Just go to her channel, search Ghomeshi, Ghomeshi. And you'll come up with a whole bunch of articles where she just absolutely picks that entire mess apart in the most, like with a scalpel, just absolutely brilliantly. When you look at that particular case, that case is largely seen in media as a case of justice denied. It is a case of a man, a sexual predator, getting away with it. Because he was acquitted on all charges. And that case and the acquittal, and then the dismissal of the case involving a 4th complainant who was also prepared to lie, and her star witness was found to have been prepared to lie on the stand as well. A man who said that he witnessed the sexual harassment while he was working for the show Q at CBC on such and such a date that was actually 18 months before he actually ever worked for CBC. So, I mean, like, he was just prepared to go in and lie on the stand for this woman. Anyhow, so the prosecutor dropped all of the charges in exchange for Ghomeshi signing a peace bond saying, I won't go anywhere near you for a year, which I'm sure he was happy to do. But essentially, we have now new legislation coming forward in Canada. It's had its second reading in Parliament. It's gone to committee. There are still debates going on within committee. There have been a few minor amendments to this bill, but certainly not enough to protect due process. But essentially, a bill that would have made it such that all of the evidence that Ghomeshi brought in his trial that showed that those women were lying would either not be admissible. Well, it would all be subjected to the rape shield test. And the rules around rape shield testing would also change in terms of the complainant, right? So whereas previously anything that was protected by rape shield laws would, before the start of the trial, would have to go to a judge in a closed hearing with the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney. And the defense attorney. And those would be the people present. The judge would make a ruling on whether it was relevant enough to be admissible, whether refusing to admit it into evidence would violate the defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial, all of those things, whether it was truly relevant evidence. So, nothing about, 10 years ago she banged a football team and so, she's obviously a big old slut. No, if it was pertaining to the sex act in question, or if it was relevant specifically to the incident in question, it would be allowed in. The prosecutor would have knowledge of it. That does not happen in any other kind of case in Canada, but that's how things used to be. That's how things used to be. The prosecutor would gain knowledge of this and thereby gain knowledge of defense strategy, and would be able to anticipate things. But at the same time, the prosecutor isn't allowed to disclose, or wasn't allowed to disclose, any of that to the complainant, because the complainant is not the prosecutor's client. The complainant is not actually a party to the case. The complainant is just a witness. So essentially, the prosecutor's not allowed to prep their witnesses. The prosecutor's not allowed to disclose information that the complainant otherwise would not know, because that would be tainting their testimony. But now, not only is like a whole bunch of stuff now subject to rape shield tests, including text messages and emails and all kinds of communications and records and everything else, right, that would not have been subjected to this test prior, but the complainant and her personal attorney are to be present at this closed hearing where all of this evidence is reviewed, right? So now you have a situation where the complainant gets to look at the evidence that this man has, and now has an opportunity to tailor her testimony to conform to the evidence, right? So if this bill had been a law when Jian Ghomeshi was tried, he would not have been acquitted. He would have been convicted, and it would have been a miscarriage of justice. And, and what really strikes me as amazing is the blatant and egregious lies these women told on the stand. Particularly the primary or most notable or notorious complainant, Lucy Ducouture, who is a Canadian TV celebrity, I guess D-list celebrity. She starred on, had a role on Trailer Park Boys, but she essentially, like, nothing that she said on the stand even matched any of the physical evidence in this case, right? So it's like you have three women's testimony, and that's the entirety of their evidence is their testimony. And every single piece of physical evidence in the case contradicted that testimony, just completely annihilated it. And she lied. She fucking lied. The judge said in his judgment that he believed she was trying to deceive the court, Ducouture in particular, that she seemed to have been intentionally deceiving the court. And he said, oh my God, he said in his judgment that, because obviously he's been through feminist rape and sexual assault training, he said that even the fact that she's a liar and would lie under oath was not enough for him to say that the sexual assault did not occur. His entire decision rested on the smidgen of a reasonable doubt that was raised by the fact that her testimony in no way matched the physical evidence. So even her lying, he essentially said, we all know that rape victims sometimes behave in mysterious ways, and that a genuine victim might do some things that seem very strange to other people, including perjuring themselves. Right? So even that wasn't enough. No, it had to actually be that based on the evidence, the physical evidence that there was, he had to deem her testimony unreliable. It was not reliable enough to base a conviction on and put someone away for years, right? So I am just blown away by this. You can literally have a judge in his decision saying, yeah, I believe this woman lied. But, you know, that doesn't mean she's not actually a victim. And, you know, it's entirely possible that it's proof. Her lying is proof that she's a victim. Because any behavior by a complainant, right, is evidence of rape. All behaviors by a complainant, lying, stabbing someone, burning down someone's house, you know, just all of it consistent with rape. There is nothing a complainant could possibly do that is not consistent with rape, that is not consistent with having been victimized. No behavior is outside of that bailiwick or that rubric of behaviors consistent with having been sexually assaulted, right? So we are entering this, like, because before Bill C-51, which is essentially this bill that will amend all these rape shield laws and everything, reform them, I guess, would be the word used by feminists. Prior to that, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy about, you know, sort of this idea that it's all the left's fault and all of this, right? That gynocentrism and feminism, they're just left things, right? No, they exist on the right as well, because the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Rona Ambrose, as one of her last acts before she announced that she was going to retire from politics, introduced and pushed through, and it was voted unanimously in, a bill that would subject all judges wanting to, you know, ascend the bench, to go through feminist sexual assault training. So that's law in Canada now. It's law in Canada now that a judge cannot look at a lying liar who lies on the stand and is proven to have lied on the stand and say, well, maybe she's actually lying about being assaulted too. He's not allowed to assume that.
You can blame the U.S. for that. That's straight out of the Violence Against Women Act.
This is where we're fucking at right now. This is where we're at, right? Bill C-51 also introduces provisions that would criminalize half the BDSM community, and based on erotic asphyxiation, which is now technically rape. Well, it's not rape to asphyxiate your partner. It's just rape to actually sexually touch them while they're unconscious. And it's also rape to kiss your partner awake, even if they asked you to do it before they went to bed. That's illegal too. It's illegal to caress your partner in their sleep. It's illegal to, while you're asleep, press your erection up against your partner's bum while they're asleep, right? Because you don't have their consent to do that because they're asleep. So, I mean, like, This is absolutely fucking ridiculous. And that case was based on a false allegation that the appellate court determined was false, right? But it went to the Supreme Court and they said, oh, well, you know, we'll just change the precedent and the law, the case law, to make it into a factual allegation. And the guy gets to go back to jail. I'm blown away by this. It would also instantiate in law an elimination, a virtual elimination of the reasonable but mistaken belief in consent defense. And the case that that's based on, right, which is called R.V. Ewanchuk, that was a good decision, right? That was an absolutely good decision by the Supreme Court of Canada to convict that guy, right? Because there was absolutely no way in those circumstances, in that situation, with those two people, that Mr. Ewanchuk could even remotely argue that he reasonably believed that this young woman, less than half of his age, applying for a job, right, and then being cornered in his trailer, was consenting. Like there's no argument there. She reported it within 15 minutes of her getting home from what happened, right? And so, I mean, like, this was a cut and dried case, right? But it would instantiate in law the idea that there really is no such thing, even like between any two people in any situation, that there could possibly be a reasonable but mistaken belief in consent, right? So if you're standing at the counter, you know, at the sink doing dishes, and your husband of 20 years comes up and squeezes your bum, he's committed a crime, because a reasonable but mistaken belief that you would be consenting to that is not a concept that is valid in law now, if this bill goes through. So I'm just absolutely, like, I don't know how, and none of these fucking lying women ever face any consequences. None of them. The one in RVJA, where she lied about what her boyfriend had done to her after he choked her out. He said she said he went beyond the scope of her consent. In reality, they'd agreed in advance to everything, right? And then the Supreme Court said, well, she can't really, under the law, agree in advance to things that'll happen to her when she's unconscious, so back to jail he goes, right? I mean, like, none of these women face any fucking consequences. These women are changing the fucking laws of a nation based on their lies.
You know, imagine
I'm done. I'm done.
Imagine applying that in other areas. You can't consent ahead of time to something that's going to be done to you when you're unconscious. There goes all
surgery.
Consent for surgery. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, like, you know, you get penetrated with a knife there. So is surgery now rape?
In the dissenting decision, the judge who wrote the dissenting arguments, because it was a 6-3 decision, I believe. The dissenting judge said, this form of this notion of consent, I mean, like, it would make surgery impossible. It would even impact if, say, Hannah and I go out partying, we go out on a pub crawl, and I tell Hannah, I'm planning on getting absolutely fucking blotto tonight. Can you make sure that I get home safe? And then at some point in the evening, I have that, you know, 150th drink that actually puts my Viking liver over the edge, right? And I pass out, okay? And I do that. And then Hannah and some other people at Hannah's direction kind of bundle me into a cab, and Hannah takes me home, and she hauls me into my house, and she tucks me into bed, okay? And she lies me on my side so I don't asphyxiate on my own vomit. And she sits at my bedside and makes sure I'm okay all night, okay? She's just kidnapped me and forcibly restrained and confined me. Under the law, if consent worked the way it does now, under Canadian precedent and soon to be under Canadian statute, if it worked that way.
In 10 years, that'll be the plot of a porn movie. There won't be any sex in it because sex is no longer allowed. It'll just be, you know, some chick taking some other chick home from a bar and tucking her in and sitting up next to her all night. It's very risque.
Holding my hair. I know it's very long and it does tend to get barred on the tips, but she could hold my hair out of the way. But that would also be some form of assault because, you know, I'm too out of it to give her consent to touch me in that way. Like this, I mean, and you look at even just the whole idea of consent, like sexual consent initially, in the law initially, it was based on contract law, right?
Yep.
So it was based not on how much you want it, how desperate you are for it, how turned on you are, and it was just, I agree to do this, and I'm not being coerced or extorted or forced, okay? I voluntarily agree to do this. Okay, so let's say I'm at the bank and I want to open a checking account, and the bank rep sits down with me and she's going through all the details of this particular checking account. She's like, okay, well, I want you to initial here because this is where it notes what the service charges are. And I want you to initial here because this is where it notes what the interest rate is. And I want you to initial here because this is where it notes that if you bounce a check, you will be charged an NSF fee of $60 will be automatically deducted from your account. Okay? And I make a little bit of a face and I go, oh, $60. And she says, well, you know, I mean, like that's pretty standard and I don't think you're going to find anything better at any other bank and whatever. Okay? So I'm like, okay, and then so I initial that, and then I sign the contract. And then 6 months later, I bounce a check, and then I go to the police, and I accuse the bank of stealing $60 out of my account. Because my consent to that term of the contract was not enthusiastic. And because, okay, and here's where the real feminist arguments come in, the second wave feminist arguments come in. Okay, the banks collectively, okay, have a great deal of power compared to the consumer, okay, and therefore, any consent I give is not really voluntary because, you know, when she said to me that you're not going to get a better term regarding NSF fees anywhere else. Okay, that was that bank rep exercising the bank's collective power to subjugate me and render my consent meaningless because I have no choice but to say yes to somebody to that term of the agreement. Okay, this is Catherine McKinnon's argument that all heterosexual sex is rape because women literally do not have the political power as a collective to give a meaningful no, to say no to sex, and therefore any yes they give is equally meaningless.
Oh gosh, speaking of women not having the political power to say no to anything, I was actually doing some research before the podcast, like I always try to do, and I couldn't find something until the very dead-ass last minute, so forgive me if I haven't had a chance to go fully through this 50-page document, but it's a paper that I found. It's a little on the old side. It's from 2009, but it's titled Turning a Blind Eye, Perjury in Domestic Violence Cases. And from what I'm gathering so far, this paper is basically just listing off a number of different reasons, more or less, why women will lie in domestic violence cases on the stand, why they will perjure themselves, and why, you know, in a lot of cases, this might actually not be all that big of a deal. Even though one of the first sentences in the entire paper is, false statements in domestic violence cases are a significant problem and considered an epidemic with an estimated 40 to 90% of domestic violence victims recanting, which is like a really broad number, actually.
Oh, but that's just their internalized misogyny. They just they lie when they recant. Well, the recantation is the lie, Prim. Don't you know anything?
Well, I mean, like they give an example of where, for the purposes of this article, purported domestic abuse victims who provide false statements can be divided into one of two categories: the person who files a false report but was never abused, false complainant, and the domestic violence victim who recants a true accusation of abuse, recanting victims. This article focuses on the recanting victim. Because, of course, they do. Why would they want to do a study on the other category? That would be misogyny, I guess.
Yeah, it totally would be. I mean, like they have no interest in, because the only people who are hurt in those cases are the men, right? So why would they even study that?
No kidding.
Stop being silly, Prim.
Hey, it's not my article, right? So the first section they have in here, like I've just got a couple of sections highlighted that I wanted to talk about that I thought would be interesting. The first one is titled "The Problem of Perjury," and then there's a subsection, the problem of perjury in domestic violence cases. If a trial is considered a search for the truth, perjured testimony from domestic violence victims impedes access to the truth. The issue of lying in domestic violence cases is complex. On one hand, the law is well settled. Lying under oath is perjury. On the other hand, domestic violence cases are complicated, and the motives for lying in these cases can be as diverse as the victims themselves. Professor Cheryl Hanna noted the problem of the double bind in domestic violence cases. The double bind refers to the idea that in every gender dilemma there are two solutions, each of which contains good and not so good elements. Prosecutors confronted with false statements in domestic violence cases are also faced with a double bind: either turn a blind eye or prosecute. Either decision results in serious consequences for both the criminal justice system and the victim.
Yeah.
And well, this is something we ran into in the 7 Years in Hell case. The vexatious litigant in that case was able to not just lie, but demonstrably lie. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. She did it over and over and over again. An example, and I can actually read this off because I opened it up, so I've got it in front of me. Like, her accusations were not always just dismissed due to lack of proof. The victim offered evidence contradicting her each time. Each time he was able to prove her claims false. Twice she accused him of physical assault at times when he was incapacitated due to documented medical conditions. In another instance, she accused him of making harassing phone calls to her house. He could prove that he was home during that time, and the date that she gave in her complaint, and phone records proved no phone calls were made to her from his home at that time. Further, she provided a tape of the alleged call. Upon listening to the tape and hearing stark, compelling differences between the caller's voice and speech and his voice and speech, the prosecuting attorney abandoned the case. He was acquitted. The tape didn't just fail to prove her case. It showed that she was lying. That type of revelation occurred in each of her complaints against him. She repeatedly accused him when he could prove his whereabouts, made demonstrably false and self-contradictory statements, offered evidence that turned out to be demonstrably false. And in addition, her courtroom behavior was absolutely insane. And every time she engaged in this, we kept thinking, oh, this is proved right in front of the judge right now, right here.
This will be the time. This will be the time
Every
she faces
single
some
time.
Consequences.
Nothing. It never happened. So I started looking stuff up. And right in the Violence Against Women Act, it's paid for judges and other court personnel to receive training and this is Duluth model-based training in handling domestic violence cases. And part of that training is that when... Sorry, I'm in a mess. You probably just heard all my shit fall over. When a woman lies in court in a situation like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that she wasn't victimized. That is why I said, and this is in domestic violence cases, this is in rape cases, every single one of these cases, they're pushed away from prosecuting for perjury, from prosecuting for lying to police during an investigation, from prosecution for filing a false complaint, from prosecution for contempt of court. This complainant, this woman would go into court, and she would sit in the courtroom when the victim was talking, or when the judge was talking. She would sit there and interrupt testimony. And even the judge, she would interrupt the judge, and angry shouts, screaming rants, exaggerated body motions, throwing herself around like a 2-year-old. And this was not, some petite little, 5-foot tall cutie or anything like that. No, this was a gargantuan 5'10", broad-shouldered, overweight, pouty-mouthed looking, angry monster.
Trigglypuff.
Yeah. Oh, well, she wasn't quite as fat as Trigglypuff, but she was big enough that I wouldn't have wanted to be on the other end of one of her fists. And I'll tell you what, it was intimidating to see her behave like that in court. And with respect to other people's behavior, it's not very easy to intimidate me like that. When you're dealing with a crazy person, it's a totally different situation. And here we are. This woman behaving like this, and from my experience with court, and I've been in court more than a few times because I've been in more than a few car accidents as passenger in other people's cars, and I've never seen behavior like this in court except in this type of case. I've never seen behavior like this condoned in a courtroom, or even behavior that's slightly like this condoned in a court. If you so much as say in a polite manner something that the judge finds disrespectful, he can slap you with contempt.
Oh,
much
well,
less
I mean,
throwing a screaming fit in the courtroom.
I recall at one point in the Honey Badger trial, there was a sort of a misunderstanding or a miscommunication between Allison and the judge and Harry, our counsel, and it would have been just like absolutely 100% super easy for me to just clarify just by saying, here's the thing that everybody's trying to get at, right? And I started to stand up, and the judge looked at me and shook his head, right? Like, yeah, no, you're not entitled to speak here, right? Not even to be helpful, politely with, I beg the court's indulgence, but, blah, that's what the parties are trying to clarify here. So, I mean, it's very, court is supposed to be a dignified place. It's supposed to be a place that follows extremely tight protocols and procedures and
tight rules of order.
Yeah, and respect for the bench, for the judge, and for the process. And so, yeah, the fact that this woman could behave like a toddler in a courtroom and be disrespectful to the judge and lie and lie and lie and lie and lie, and the judge still didn't fucking do anything. And this is the insane thing, right? Because
I just got to interrupt because I got to show this in the chat is just, it blows my mind. Mike Barbarossa says, I got contempt of court for snatching a paper too abruptly.
Oh, jeez.
So the vexatious litigant didn't get contempt of court for throwing a screaming temper tantrum in the courtroom, for throwing herself around, for stomping so hard you could feel it in the floor 20 feet away from her.
Oh, God.
Yikes.
And she didn't weigh enough for that to just be natural. She was using her muscles to do that. And she's all right? She can perjure herself and she's all right. But snatching a piece of paper too quickly, too abruptly, whap.
Well, I mean, this is what any advocate or counselor will tell any man who's going into a domestic violence case or prosecution or a custody battle or anything like that is to never, 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 under any circumstances, ever, ever, ever express anger. Not even just a quiet frown. Like, just don't do it, because that is going to affect the outcome. And yet women seem to have carte blanche to behave however they want in the courtroom, and they suffer no penalties, and it's absolutely insane to me. Like, there was I would suggest everybody go to a blog called Data Gone Odd, and there are 2 blog posts. It's called How to Lie and Mislead with Rape Statistics, Part 1 and Part 2. And Part 2 is article. Part 2 is particularly interesting because it actually looked into a study that was done by the Making a Difference MAD Foundation, and on what is the percentage of rape complaints, sexual assault complaints, that turn out to be false. And they found about 7%, 7 to 8% or something like that, of the complaints made to the, I think it was 8 participating police agencies. So 7 to 8% of the complaints made to these agencies that were participating in the study turned out to be false. But, okay, the cops who were investigating rape complaints and sexual assault complaints were subjected to 3 days of training before they were able to participate in this study. And during this training, they were taught essentially that there's no mandate on the part of police agencies to prosecute false accusations. So it's really not worth your time to take a case that you believe is a false accusation and pursue it to the point where you can prove that it's a false accusation. They also said that you shouldn't ask the complainant the same question twice, because that can actually cause inconsistencies in their story to arise, and that can damage your ability to pursue the case. They said that if you actually act in such a way that the complainant believes that you doubt her story, it could be potentially emotionally and psychologically devastating to a genuine rape victim. And that that a recantation was not enough to determine that a case was false. A case could only be determined false after a thorough fact-based investigation determined it to be false. So basically, okay, what they said was, if you think it's false, don't prove it, because it's not worth your time. If you think she's lying, don't act like it, or, you know, act like you don't believe her, because you could be psychologically devastating an actual victim of rape, right? Don't ask the complainant the same question more than once, because you might find out she's lying, okay? And whatever you do, you know, don't go looking for any evidence that she is lying or that the accusation is false. Just absolutely avoid all of that altogether. Actively avoid finding out if cases are false. But you can only say a case is false if you proved it after a thorough fact-based investigation that we're telling you not to do. So in this blog post, the guy says, you know, honestly, they are acting like 7% is like a really low number, right? But I'm kind of shocked that they were able to find so many given these parameters, given these requirements, right? You're actively avoiding finding false cases, and you're finding 7% of your cases are false. This is absolutely astounding.
Well, there's an interesting thing that happened with the FBI as well, with sort of either false or mistaken allegations where there was a study done on, let's see if I've got it here, on, yeah, I do, 25% of men in these cases were exonerated. It was case studies in the USA of DNA evidence to embellish innocence after trial, and a quarter of the cases they looked at were exonerated. That was done. This is old. This was years ago. This was 1996, and I ended up in a discussion on Twitter not too long ago with a feminist about this, and her argument was that data was no longer valid because there was newer data from the FBI, and the newer data from the FBI still showed higher than she claimed it showed, but it showed lower than this. Well, when I looked at it, what I figured out was before it was common to use DNA evidence in court cases, there were a large number of men who were falsely convicted. 1 in 4 is a pretty large number, right? Who were falsely convicted, who later were exonerated when DNA evidence was able to be tested in a way that could prove whether they were the guy or not. And then once it became known among women that DNA testing would demonstrate whether it was the guy or not.
Not just among women, but among prosecutors.
Well, yes, but that eliminated an area of potential false accusation where, like, it didn't eliminate women's tendency. It didn't eliminate whether a woman might decide she wanted to do that or not. But it did mean that a woman would know if she had sex and then she claimed she was raped by someone other than the person that she had sex with, that DNA testing would demonstrate that was not true. Well, if she didn't have sex and she claimed that she was raped, DNA testing would show that there was no DNA from the guy that she was accusing.
Well, and also what happened when DNA testing became commonplace was that a man might be arrested, he might be charged, right? And then he submits his DNA test. And then when that DNA test comes up negative, then the prosecution ceases. It just never goes to court.
Right, it doesn't go forward any further. So it stops the false accusation in its tracks.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, it probably has some impeding value in terms of women who make false allegations. It also has an ameliorating or mitigating effect in terms of prosecutors aren't going to pursue something when the DNA test comes up negative, right? So, right. I mean, it's like, so, I mean, but yeah, and one of the other things too, and I actually watched this during the sort of debate between Lacey Green and Blair White ages ago now, at least it feels like it, where Lacey Green said, no, the FBI, they release this data every year, on false accusations. And, it's not like the 2% thing is based on the FBI and their numbers on false accusations. But as far as I know, the last year that the FBI even made those numbers public anywhere was in 1997.
The feminist I argued with did give me a more recent, and I don't seem to have it. I thought I had bookmarked it, but I don't. But she did give me a more recent thing. It wasn't the same data as this. It was a different data set. It was from a different, like, this is from people trying to establish their innocence after they'd been found guilty, and the data set that she gave me was not. It was from cases where it hadn't gone to court yet, if I remember right, where it was pre-trial, but it was still FBI data, and this was a situation where they're basically trying to find evidence to prosecute the guy with, and it was a lower rate than 1 in 4. But it was higher than 2%. And it was still showing that there was a pretty significant number of allegations that either they got the wrong guy or it was false altogether, that there was no DNA present to test, at least from that wasn't hers. So I mean, here you have a situation where they're actually, not only are they citing a different data set, but they're misquoting what is in the data set, and they are misunderstanding the implications of the change. Because the implications of the change are not the previous data set was inaccurate. The implications of the change are that the previous data set shows what happens when you can't present evidence to prove whether a woman is lying or not about your commission of a crime.
Well, there's also another line in this one paper that I found a little bit later on. It's prosecutors must walk a thin line between encouraging a victim to proceed truthfully and making a victim feel coerced. And it's just kind of like, obviously, you've gotten to trial, for goodness sakes. At this point, you should be expected to tell the truth. There's another line here that's might be familiar with the Jean Ghomeshi case. Not all domestic violence victims recant, and victims do not necessarily react to violence and trauma in the same way. Which is basically just what Karen was saying earlier. Like, you know, victims behave in mysterious ways. It doesn't matter how they behave because they're a victim, and how dare you challenge that?
It's almost like a Bible verse. The victim behaves in mysterious ways. The victim moves in mysterious ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
I'm sorry, but you know, they're not gods.
But the victim is infallible.
And the thing is, this is a common... Feminists talk about victims as though every victim has the same mental issues with dealing with stuff. It didn't... I don't know how to explain this. It's upsetting to not be believed. Yeah, it's upsetting to not be believed. When you describe something that happened to you, this happened to me, and these are the details, and somebody goes, well, can you explain this part that doesn't make sense to me? You know, yeah, it's upsetting, but at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to clarify things, to make people understand, to demonstrate your case, and under just that amount of pressure. With my own experiences, that would never have been enough to get me to recant. You couldn't have gotten me to turn around and say, no, I exonerate this person. This person didn't do the things to me that they did to me. And it would take a hell of amount of not just pressure, but actual threat. And for them to claim that under the current circumstances, where the court bends over backward, where the law enforcement system bends over backward, where society bends over backward to sympathize and comfort and consider the victim or the accuser that they believe is a victim, because you're supposed to believe accusers, and turn around and say, but they're lying because of some degree of pressure. I'm calling bullshit. The only degree of pressure that would cause them to do that would be if feminists are sitting there behind them going, nobody's gonna believe you. They're gonna put you in jail for telling your story. There's all this pressure that you have to deal with. It was not like that for me. I've never had a situation. I've talked to people that, you know, about my experiences that I would have expected to be the most skeptical, particularly in terms of the experiences with a female perpetrator. This is something that, it took me almost 30 years to even talk about it to other people, because it was just a bizarre experience for me. And at that point, you know, I'm not going to name the perpetrator because I don't have evidence, and I don't want people to believe anything I say about this person out of hand, without evidence. That's against everything I believe in. But if I talk about the experience, nobody turns around and says, well, I don't think that happened to you. Even other women, even feminists will be, I'm sorry that happened to you. They might say, I'm sorry that happened to you, but it's not evidence that it happens to people, which doesn't make any sense. But that's the worst I've gotten out of it. That's the worst that anybody said to me about it.
Well,
other than you didn't understand your sexuality and you really liked it.
One of the things that that I tried to get across to an interviewer from, I think it was CTV News, after the "Don't Be That Girl" poster campaign here in Edmonton made national headlines. That was fun. And I started getting calls from, all these TV news outlets. Anyhow, so CTV News, they came, they interviewed me in the parking lot of my condo complex, and I was trying to explain this concept to this reporter, and it just was not getting through to her. But I said, okay, so let's say I was raped, okay, and I believe the feminists. I believe the feminists. I believe everything that they say, right? And they say that the system's stacked against me. I won't be believed, right? That most rapists, the vast majority of rapists, will never spend even one night in jail, okay? And only 2% of women who file reports of rape are lying or mistaken, because that's really what it is, lying or mistaken. So I go into the police and I go to make my statement, and the police start asking me questions to test the veracity of my claims, right? And I think to myself, and they have to do this, right? They absolutely have to do this. It's just procedure. It's just what the police have to do because they're conducting an investigation, right?
Of course.
But what am I thinking now? I'm thinking everybody, including these guys, know that only 2% of sexual assault reports turn out to be false or mistaken, right? They know there's a 98% chance that I'm telling the God's gospel truth, okay? They know that. And they're still pushing me and prodding me and asking me questions and asking me to clarify, and they're acting like, they aren't swallowing everything I say, hook, line, and sinker. Obviously, all those feminists were right. These cops don't want to help me. They just are prejudiced against me, and nothing good is going to come of me complaining.
Yeah, no.
If I knew as a woman, okay, that false reports and mistaken reports of sexual assault occur on a much more regular basis than 2% of all reports, right? What am I going to be thinking when the cops start testing the veracity of my claims? I'm going to be thinking, well, it's not that they don't or won't believe me. It's that they have to test the veracity of my claims, because some women lie and some women are mistaken, and it's not an insignificant amount. And this is just what they have to do. And they're actually trying to help me bring my case forward and build my case against this guy, right? And make it stronger, make it more solid, right? They're trying to get to the bottom of this. They're trying to actually conduct an investigation, right? That's what I would be thinking if I never listened to a single feminist. Okay, but if I listened to feminists, I would stand up in the middle of the interview and I would say, I'd like to recant my claim, and I'd fuck off, because I would think, there's no point. There's no point. These guys don't believe me, even though they know there's a 98% chance that I'm telling the truth. And they aren't going to help me. They're not interested.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up that they would rather push excuse me, that kind of a narrative. It's like, do you want these people to get help, or do you just want to make people believe your nonsense instead? But the one thing that I had wanted to mention was there is a next section here, and I just thought that it was kind of something interesting to bring up. They said, additionally, the motivation for lying, similar to victims, is diverse. What motivates some domestic violence victims to lie and deny their abuse? It depends on whether the lie is a false report or a lie recanting a true allegation of abuse. The why behind a lie of a false complainant making a false report can be similar to the motivation of those who lie in other cases, for example, revenge, custody disputes, and does not require further exploration. As an aside, of course it doesn't. Like, it's only a major issue. Why would it not require further exploration? But the reasons why a domestic violence victim would recant a true allegation of abuse are more complicated. And what I wanted to say about that was, I mean, I'm not completely unsympathetic to people who are hesitant to tell the truth about their abuse. I lied about my abuse at the hands of my stepmother plenty as a child, but you know, I was a child. I didn't have any power. I assumed that telling the truth about it would just make it get worse because somebody would tell her about it, and she'd say, "Oh, you know, she's just lying. That didn't actually happen. In fact, I did tell my father one time, and that is legitimately what happened. And it did just wind up getting worse. So I never said anything again after that." I can understand a woman being afraid to make a report to the police for similar reasons. But if you make a report and then get as far as a trial and then decide to get cold feet and all of a sudden say, "Oh, I take it back, it never happened," like, Jesus, is it wrong of me to expect that if you've gotten this far, then maybe you should be held accountable if you lie after having taken up so much time and gotten this far, and you've gotten this entire court of people together to talk about this issue, and then all of a sudden that's when you decide to lie about it. Like, I feel like people should be held to account for these actions.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, this is why in a lot of jurisdictions in the United States, they have no drop policies for sexual assault and domestic violence. So even if the victim or the alleged victim, I guess, recants and says, or stops cooperating, the prosecutor is not allowed to drop it until they have no other option, right? Like the prosecutor must pursue it to the very, very, very bitter end. And so, but when you look at it too, I mean, because I think the situation is quite nuanced in some ways. I mean, like, oh God, what was his name? Mark Karimi. He was running for sheriff in not San Diego, someplace down in California. And he had married a woman. He was half Iranian. His mother was white. His father was Iranian. And he was born in Iran, and his parents got divorced, and his mother just essentially took him and left the country. And that was almost the last he saw of his dad ever, when he was just very young. Right. And then he married this woman who happened to be a television star or something like that in Venezuela or Brazil or something. I think it was Brazil, actually. Anyhow, so they have a son. They had a 5-year-old son, and he was running for sheriff again. In his constituency, in his county. And it was very stressful. He had a whole bunch of political opposition that were trying to dig up dirt on him and make things difficult for him. So he was under a lot of stress, and so they were having marital problems because of that. And that's just typical. You know, when you find out your daughter's a crack addict and pregnant, you're going to have some marital conflict over that. You can have some difficulties and fights and disruption. When you're losing your house, similarly, right? You know, like you're going to have some arguments and conflicts, and you might not behave the way you otherwise would. So they were having some problems, and she kind of, in the middle of a fight, when tempers were flaring, she just kind of blurted out that she was going to take their son to visit her family in South America. She was just going to do it. And of course, he's thinking, yeah, no, you're going to take my son, you're going to go there, and you're never coming back like my mother did with me. Right? And so she went to storm off, and he grabbed her arm to pull her back, and left a bruise on her arm. Now, most people don't realize that women bruise much more easily than men do. In fact, I've actually gone places covered in bruises because I was play fighting with my dog, you know, or my dog jumped up on the couch and accidentally stepped on my leg. So, I mean, we bruise very, very easily. So it wasn't even necessarily that he grabbed her violently. He just grabbed her and pulled her back. And then she confided, I think he said to her that if she tried to take his son away, he would fight her in court, you know, all the way to the bitter end, blah, 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 right? So she confided with a neighbor and said, you know, we had this horrible fight last night, and I'm really worried because I'm worried that he's going to preemptively take me to court for custody, and, you know, and all of this. And I feel so bad. I just didn't realize how he would react, you know, but now that I think about it, obviously me saying I want to take our son out of the country while we're having marital difficulties would probably remind him of what his mother did when he was little, right? I should have realized that and not said it. It was like totally inconsiderate of me and insensitive of me. Right. And I completely understand the way he reacted in hindsight and all of this. Right. So the woman, the female neighbor, says, let's just get a photo of that bruise just in case he serves you with divorce papers and goes for custody. And so she lets this woman take a picture of her bruise. And then the woman files a police report for domestic assault, the neighbor. And 2.5 years later, and the judge had imposed a restraining order on both of them, a no contact order on both of them. So neither were allowed to contact the other, not even to speak on the phone, weren't allowed to live anywhere near each other. And the entire time, this poor woman is saying, I don't want this. I don't want him to be prosecuted. I don't like, it was an understandable thing. It was not, he's not abusive, right? This is not abuse. He was upset. He overreacted. You know, we want to mend our marriage. 2.5 years. 2.5 freaking years.
Well, and that's part of the Violence Against Women Act, and this is something it's not mandated. What it is funding that local departments, local court systems, everything that you get from the federal government in those areas is partly dependent on following prescribed policies that are put into the Violence Against Women Act, and one of them is a non-drop, and it's really bad. Prosecutorial discretion can be abused, and prosecutors can be wrong, and judges can be wrong, and everything. But making a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter solution to it is actually worse, because there are a lot of times with that type of human nuance. That was a situation where abuse did not occur, and it was perceived as abuse by somebody outside the situation who stepped in and then ended up abusing the couple. And she may have had the best of intentions. She may have been taught
and
herself,
the child,
you know, and yes, and the child. She may have had the best of intentions. She may have thought she was protecting this woman, you know, or she could have just been annoyed with the guy, you know, and decided, well, these people don't belong together, or, well, this guy's an asshole and I'm going to get him. You know, and you never know. And it could have been anything. That type of situation happens, unfortunately, more often than people are aware. All you have to have, and this happens, like here in the Dayton area, I think one of the most common calls to the police is a domestic. And it's a lot of times it's stuff like, it's not the people involved calling the cops and saying, you know, oh, he hit me or she hit me, or I'm afraid, or I need help, or anything like that. It's a neighbor, you know, they're having a screaming fight again, and come and do something about it. Come and stop them. Come and break it up. Come and get him. Come and get her. Whatever. And then the cops have to come and play mediator, where the couple didn't necessarily need a mediator. They didn't need the cops to show up and do anything. They may have worked it out on their own. Or
the cops are operating under a mandatory arrest policy where they have to take somebody away in cuffs.
And see, the other thing around here that's really difficult is you have a whole handful of different precincts that are sort of, there's the Dayton municipal precincts, and then there's also, you have Kettering and Riverside and Huber Heights and Oakwood and all these other little suburbs around the Dayton area that's all part of the Dayton metro area, and they're all crunched in together, and they all handle things differently depending on how much they depend on that federal funding. So if somebody calls, if they're on the border between, say, Dayton proper and Riverside, or Dayton proper and I think there's parts of Huber that it borders on and stuff like that, and they call one precinct, the cops show up, they talk to the couple, and find out that the couple was just having a tense moment over how do we handle this particular aspect of our tax filing, and they got it figured out, and they're not even yelling anymore, and it's done and over with, and the neighbor was just annoyed at the noise, and then they're like, well, next time, you know, take a breath, don't annoy your neighbors, and they leave. And maybe the next time the neighbor calls the other precinct and the cops show up, and it's the same exact type of story but with a different stressor, and the cops arrest the guy because he yelled at the woman, and obviously that makes him the primary aggressor. All she has to do is say, well, you know, he yelled first, and that's it. That's all it takes. Or, yes, he yelled, but I was yelling too. And even if it's just, yes, he yelled, but I was yelling too. Well, if he yelled, then he's an aggressor, and it's that bad.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I've seen that with people here over and over again, to the point where if there was a domestic in my apartment complex where I live, I would have to be in fear of somebody being injured before I would call police. And you know, I'd have to be afraid to intervene myself before I would call police. That, you know, there would have to be a confrontation with somebody who was actively and openly dangerous, because I would be afraid that I would do more damage to that couple calling the police than I would leaving the situation alone and letting them work it out. And because I know that women in this area have multiple organizations to help them get out if they want to leave, I wouldn't worry so much about a woman who chose to stay. That's a choice. That's a flat-out choice. And that means interfering in that situation beyond, you know, saying, hey, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do this. You know, I would be more likely to interfere if I saw a woman abusing a man, simply because I know none of those organizations really do much for a guy who is in the same situation. But I'm going to move on to our super chats. It blows my mind the way the system handles this. But I'm going to move on to our super chats, because we do have a pretty good sized stack of them, and I haven't gone through any of them yet. So let's see here. Going back up to the top of my list, I've been taking them out of our chat and copy pasting them to a text file so I could sort them out. Tomo Haas gave us $2 and says, longtime fan, want to send fan art, how do? And it looks like Allison did answer my question on that. It's topic@badgerpod.com is the correct email to send that to. And then let's see, and that will be interesting to see as well. Frenchinator2 gave us $2 and said, have you read John Locke? Now, I personally haven't, but have either of you guys?
No.
Okay. This obviously is something that we need to look up.
I mean, I've read a little bit of Locke stuff, but it's been a long time, and yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to speak too much on it, but I did read a little bit on it in the early part of my bachelor degree.
Okay. Well, what is he talking about then when he says John Locke?
Well, I mean, like the main
Lockean philosophy and versus
Yeah.
Hobbesian philosophy or something like that.
Yeah, like wasn't he the one that postulated the original position or whatever?
No, that was oh god, that was Rawls.
Rawls, my bad. Oh, sorry
The
about that. I got
original
that mixed
position.
up.
But
Locke was the utilitarian, or am I wrong on that?
I don't know.
too?
The Locke versus Hobbes thing
it's been a long time.
was the argument as to I think a lot of it had to do with the argument of the noble savage versus the more realistic view of human nature, and the role of the state or the Leviathan, I guess, and all of those things in tempering human nature and setting some order to it and some parameters under which it can express in a healthy society and blah blah blah. So I mean, there's I know all of the arguments. I just don't necessarily know who to attribute them to.
Yeah.
There's the whole idea of natural rights, that you're born with natural rights. There's the idea of negative versus positive rights. Negative rights being you have the right to be left alone, right? And positive rights being other people have an obligation to you, to do things for you. So I mean, like, it's the whole thing is, and I never ever can keep track of who propounds which philosophy and all of the rest. So it's
in our chat. Kelb Panthera says Locke posited social contract. This does sound like something I would be interested in reading. Especially when you talk about negative rights versus positive rights, it sounds like something that I'd be interested in reading, simply because positive rights sound like the concept that I say doesn't exist as a real thing. Negative rights are real rights. Positive rights are demands that people sounds like to me demands that people make by calling them rights, but actually society doesn't have an obligation to provide you with anything. The only obligation I think society has is to not interfere, and so I would be interested in reading.
That's some pretty hardcore libertarian philosophy there, Hannah.
It probably is, but I don't think society owes anybody anything. I think nobody owes anybody anything until a deal is made and a trade is made, and then you're obligated to hold up your end of a bargain made.
A social contract.
Right, but just existing doesn't
I'd really only read about any of this stuff well before I'd gotten into any of these topics. I should really go back over and read that old stuff again just to get a renewed perspective on it all.
Darth Wedgius says, have you read John Locke? Seems to be a meme right now, though. So
oh dear.
That's great. That's not one I know.
Okay, well, my dog has read John Locke, and she is... she's been expounding on it for the last couple of minutes, whining and whining. Take your dog outside. Oh my God.
But the big question is, have you locked the John? In any case, I
always leave the John unlocked just in case I want to feel titillated when someone walks in on me.
There you go. On with more super chats. Xeranx gave us $5 and says, Della, I'm not going to bad your live stream. HBR is home. Smiley. And that tells me Xeranx is one of our old listeners. The story behind calling me Della is basically, and it goes right back to the vexatious litigant case. All things lead back to the vexatious litigant case. I was publicly Della Burton for the first year of Honey Badger Radio. The reason for it was, in the midst of the vexatious litigant case, one of the threats made to us by the other side, and this threat was carried out against the wife of the victim by the vexatious litigant, or someone in her camp, was that Child Protective Services was going to be called on his witnesses if they could find our information, because the court didn't have to give them our information, my address, my phone number, my vehicular information, and all that was actually officially sought. All of our information was officially sought. She turned in a piece of paper to the court demanding that information on all of us illegally, and wasn't penalized for it. But in any case, being concerned that Child Protective Services, which is the only government agency that is actually scarier than the IRS, would turn up at my place and actually take my kids. That scared me enough that I stayed anonymous until the youngest was old enough that CPS would be unlikely to take him, because by the time they're a certain age, they're old enough that if they're wrongfully taken, they can and will sue when they hit adulthood. So that was, I became anonymous and stayed anonymous for about a year and a half after that, and then I came out under my real name when I knew I was going to have to speak basically in public. And I don't do public speaking very often because stage fright. So I hate public speaking. But I had good reason to do it. I had very compelling reason to do it. And it had been enough time that I knew by the time it got around to her, if my identity came out and it got around to her and somebody actually made good on that threat, they'd be coming after a 17-year-old who was about to turn 18, and it could be dragged out in court long enough that they wouldn't have access anymore. And so that was the end of that. But that's why I was Della Burton for about a year and a half on Honey Badger Radio, maybe.
I remember those good old days.
Yeah, and y'all had to remember to call me Della and not Hannah.
It was not just, well, I only knew you as Della back then because I had no interest in knowing your real name. But we were sometimes on, like, this was way back when A Voice for Men Radio was hosting.
Right, and we were on Blog Talk.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was a while ago. It was back in the good old days, you know, when Grandpa Simpson would tie an onion to his belt because that was the style at the time.
That was the important thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it was a weird situation, but yeah, that tells me that that's a listener that's been with us for that whole time, clear back then. And I can't even tell you about the case. I think you might even have been a guest before Honey Badger Radio on just A Voice for Men Radio. Nope. I don't think I was. No. Oh. But the funniest thing about that is, so we didn't make a big deal about me coming out under my real name on Honey Badger Radio, which I did, I think, about a week before maybe the public speech. And it wasn't like a big public. I think there were maybe 20 people there, and I really was only talking to one person because everybody else there was with us, and then a few people showed up and watched, right? And they'd stop and watch, and then they'd walk on. I was in front of the courthouse in Dayton, and this one middle-aged man stopped. He came along, and he looked like he was heading from some part of the court complex to the parking garage, and he's walking along, and I said something, and he did a double take, and then he stopped, and he turned, and he leaned up against the lamppost and watched. And so I gave my whole speech to that guy because it was obvious that he needed to hear what I was saying, and it was about due process. And I think it was that interested him.
I remember that speech. That was actually a brilliant speech. Anybody who is interested should go and watch it. I think it's like probably one of the first videos Hannah ever put on her channel.
Yes, and YouTube demonetized it. It's not politically correct.
Oh, of course they demonetized
most of my videos are
first video
demonetized, for goodness sakes.
It was the first video of mine they ever demonetized, and they demonetized it before the big demonetization controversy. They demonetized it clear back, like maybe a month or two after I monetized my channel. And it was like an instant attack on that one thing. But
too controversial.
Due process is too controversial. You can't say that people have a right to a fair trial. That's just wrong. So yeah, that was basically. And then 6 months after I come out quietly on our channel as my real name, Man Boobs broke the shocking story that Della Burton was really Hannah Wallen. Oh my gosh!
God,
dun,
yeah.
Dun. As if it was news. 6 months after, so we'd had 6 months of weekly Honey Badger radio shows. 24 shows at least, basically, of me as Hannah Wallen. Suddenly Man Boobs discovers, dun dun dun, this woman's real name is Hannah Wallen. Exposed. That's the way he operates. But because he's a dumb
that
shit.
guy, like, does he even exist anymore?
Yeah, he still does. He's still talking, but nobody's really listening. So
nobody except for anti.
God, I can't remember her name.
Something or other.
Well, the crazy mouse chick does too. But
Man Cheese,
yeah. All those nut jobs.
Yeah.
So we also, going on, we got some more reading material here. French Honey Badger gave us $2 and says, read Murray in Rothbard! Exclamation point.
No, I will not. I will not. You know why? Because I have negative rights, and you can't make me.
There we go. Joey Jojo gave us $5 and says, in 10 years, women will wonder where all the good top 20% of men are. Better to just buy a real doll and save yourself the liability. Actually, people are already wondering. There's already feminist articles now. Feminist articles are out, and women's magazines that are not necessarily overtly feminist, but have a lot of feminist shit in them. A lot of women are out there going, "Where's all the good men? Why aren't men being gentlemen towards women anymore? Where have all the gentlemen?" And the traditionalists are like lamenting the loss of
losing
the
their
traditional
shit.
gentlemen. So this is already happening.
Maybe more people should have stood up and challenged this stuff while it was still happening. It is still happening. But more people need to stand up and challenge that stuff.
Traditionalist women are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they are very entitled in terms of what they think men should be doing for women. On the other hand, if you look at various groups of women, if we approach it right, we do have a chance of getting traditionalist women to stand up for men by pointing out
of course,
the contract that men and women make in a traditional relationship. As long as it is voluntary, that's people's choice, right? But it damn well ought to be appreciated. If a man's going to make a contract like that with a woman, he's picking up the heavier end of the contract. And in a lot of ways, he's getting
He deserves a sandwich.
He deserves a blowjob. Forget the sandwich.
Steak and a every day in my house. Every day in my house is steak and a blowjob day.
Because that's a hell of a contract. I mean, that is a cushy contract for a woman.
It's not bad. But what I wanted to say was that this sort of get a real doll thing. There are feminist articles out there trying to argue that those should be outlawed because they encourage the objectification of women. Oh my God, dog! If you start doing parkour, I'm gonna.
It's pupcore.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But yeah. So there is that request of, where have all the good men gone? That's already out there. That's already being made. There's already women out there going, what the fuck is going on? Men used to do these things for us, and they're not doing them anymore. Men used to want us, and they're not trusting us enough anymore to want us. What happened? And of course, the answer needs to be shouted loud and clear. Feminist bullshit happened. The protection of women's lies happened. People treating men like shit on behalf of women. That's what happened. As far as getting women to stand up for men, that's one area where there's nothing perfect about traditionalism. I'm not advocating traditionalism, but if you look at traditionalist women, there is a definite angle from which it can be argued for them to stand up for men, where there's no way they can be traditionalist and not accept that argument. Frenchinator 2 gave us $2 in response to the paper snatch contempt comment, and said, "Is that paper rape, Hannah?" And I would say that is definitely a deep, penetrating question. Hooky Bukisa gave us $2 and related that hashtag Me Too is more like hashtag me. Boy, is it becoming that. They're actually arguing now over who's the bigger victim.
Oh, God, and the Aziza Ansari thing, maybe that's going to be the thing that brings the whole edifice down.
I hope so.
Because I even watched a woman, a female fucking anchor on CNN, rip a strip off of the anonymous accuser who concocted that, with the help of a named journalist, journalist in quotes, in air quotes, concoct that article because by her own, this CNN anchor says, by your own description, you were not sexually assaulted. You had a bad date. Get over it.
Oh God!
Right? And everybody I have seen talking about it has said, in response to her, he didn't acknowledge my many nonverbal cues. And everybody has essentially said, what's a really good nonverbal cue if you don't want to have sex with a guy? Keep your clothes on or put them back on.
Yeah, seriously. On this subject, actually, somebody, I saw somebody post an image. I posted it in the live show thing here, but it says, it's somebody who tweeted, I don't know who this person is, but they said, women dismissing stories of assault with, if that's assault, then everyone I know has been assaulted, are so close to getting the point. Yeah. And it's like, what's the point? Is that point assault is not a big
The point is that it's not fucking assault. Oh my God.
Well,
but for this woman, clearly the point is everything is assault.
And if everything is assault, then oh my goodness, then we're all living lives full of assault, and clearly it's not that big of a deal. The world keeps turning, so
right. Well, the feminist conclusion, of course, is that it only matters when it happens to women, and when it happens to women, it's men trying to dominate and control. They won't acknowledge that it happens to men too, and they would never acknowledge that maybe women are trying to dominate and control. Or that some of this stuff isn't really assault and it's not an effort to dominate or control anybody. So yeah, the point is feminists lie about human nature.
Oh, they lie about everything, but we knew that. I mean, like what my bone of contention is with modern young women, right? Who sort of buy into this feminist thing, right? Where it's like, if you got dicked when you weren't 100% break out my pom-poms and beg, right, into it, right, then obviously I've been criminally violated in some way, right? Like if I actually give my boyfriend, okay, because I'm sorry, his libido is off the fucking charts, okay? Like there are days when I look at him after like session number 14 and I'm like, you're like wringing that thing out like a dish rag. Just leave it alone. You're going to break it. Okay? Like, you can take a break. Like, tomorrow is another day. Right? And he's like, no, I think there's still a couple more drops. Right? and I'm just like done. I just want to like get the dishes done or something. Right? And like, if I'm at the point where I would rather do the dishes than you know, lie next to him and jerk him off or something, right? It's like that's like, because I've already jerked him off 13 times today, right? He is like a absolute freak of nature, right? And I am a highly sexed woman, but there are limits, right? And 2 to 3 times a day would be just perfect for me. Just absolutely perfect for me, 2 to 3 times a day. 14 times a day, it's getting to be a little over the top. But
yeah,
it reminds me
of that joke. What does it cost me? What does it cost me? What does it fucking cost me to lie next to him and exercise my right arm and give him a hand job, you know, and give him some kisses and cuddles and smooches while I do it, right? How is that Trump? Like, he really wants it. I want to make him happy. Like, how is this a massive imposition on me? It's like we act like carrying out the garbage is like just normal behavior, and like cleaning the toilet, just normal everyday stuff, right? Cleaning up kid vomit, normal everyday stuff that everybody just has to do. It's just part of life. But jerking your guy off to make him happy is a violation of your autonomy.
And suddenly it's traumatic.
Yeah. And I'm like, what planet are these women living on? It's oh my God, you jerked a guy off when you weren't super into it. Like, get over it.
And everybody loses their minds. But it does. It reminds me, there's a meme that goes around, some lady writing a letter to some advice columnist, you know, "Dear advice columnist, my guy is always horny. He never stops. He's constantly coming up behind me and fucking me." And it goes on, and it's like a whole, you know, page long, and about halfway through the page it looks like she's writing with a vibrator attached to her hand, and eventually you can't read. That's what Karen's life makes. I could just see her, you know, she's doing the dishes, and then he comes up behind her, "Hey, by the way."
Oh my goodness. Oh no. He doesn't. He's not like that. He's like, we need to go in the bedroom for a minute.
Yeah.
Then I start to negotiate. Then I start to negotiate. Okay, how long? Right? Okay, and then I'm like, okay, give me 5 minutes. Go in there and fluff yourself, because I'm really not interested in dragging this out. You know, I have things to do.
Well, if it's 13 to 14 times, like, I mean, I was going to say a standard session is between a half an hour and an hour for me and my husband. And if we were doing it 14 times, we would not have time for anything else in the rest of the day.
Well, that's
I'd
not
be in that situation as well. I wouldn't be able to fit that many times.
I will grant you 14 times is not every day. 14 times is just his ideal day. And it really doesn't take very long. It's really not a huge like we have our long sessions sometimes, and they're very wonderful, and that's mostly for me. And then we have our short sessions that are mostly for him, and it all works out. And it's, you know, like, I just don't understand how anybody could feel violated, because like, frankly, when I look at the different chores that I have to do in a day, there are plenty of chores that I have to do in a day that are much more unpleasant than making my partner happy by, you know, giving him a hand job or a blow job or something like that.
Yeah, that's a pretty rewarding thing. You get to make somebody you love happy.
Well, it's because people are selfish.
It's not so much rewarding when you're cleaning a toilet. It's just clean when you're done. I mean, if you're OCD like me, it's different. Sometimes if I'm upset, I'll go clean things because I feel better because I've cleaned something. But aside from that, the idea of something even just being a chore, thinking of it as a chore, it still would be, it'd be a hell of a stretch to think of it as something traumatic. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, like, dishes are much less pleasant to do, really. You know, cooking, I cook for him, and that makes him happy.
I've wiped strangers' asses for a living, you know. It's not
like,
if you really want to make a comparison there.
I just like I don't understand this thing. I mean, like, I did a live stream, or not a live stream, an interview with Bettina Arndt the other day. That's up on her channel. You should go watch it. There will be, I think she's splitting it into 3 parts, 3 videos of about 20 minutes each. And, but I mean, she's just blown away by the sort of, the sense of entitlement of women who, like, because we know the research shows that men think about sex more often than women on average. They fantasize about sex more often. They masturbate more often. They want to have more sex than women do on average. Okay? And so you have this marriage, and she all of a sudden, 5 years in, decides that the sex part of the marriage is done. And for the rest of this man's life, until death do us part, he's supposed to exist. She's perfectly happy because her libido has died for various reasons, probably because of the socio-political and legal construct of marriage giving her the upper hand, and so her hypergamy just fizzles, because he's lower status than she is the moment they get married, and she knows it. But so essentially what you have is this woman essentially saying, for the rest of your life, you're never going to have sex, because if you do, you're either raping me or you're cheating on me. And either way, you're in big trouble. And the guy is just supposed to take it. And now if he says to her after 2 years of no sex, I can't live in a sexless marriage, if we can't revive our sex life, if we can't have sex on even a semi-regular basis, 1 or 2 times a week, if that's not in the picture, then I'm going to have to leave you. And that's considered abuse and coercion. Yeah. And if she gives into that, he's considered to have raped her, to have coerced her into sex.
But that only goes one way. Like a woman is allowed to withhold sex in a relationship like that and get away with not being considered abusive, which I don't know how she could hold that up. I mean, I think if I said something like that or decided something like that and was going to try to enforce it, I could keep up the pretense for about a week, 2 weeks, and then having thought about it, I would lose my shit. But to decide that, like, if a guy were to decide that, you know, or God, if she becomes so unattractive that he just can't stand the idea of touching her, and even under that circumstance, she stops bathing, anything, you know, to the point where, like, it's abhorrent to him. He doesn't want to be with her anymore if he doesn't provide sex periodically. She can accuse him of abuse. She can go into court and have him treated as the abuser during the divorce, and even
for withholding sex and affection.
Right, even though that's not supposed to affect property and custody division anymore, because divorce is now pretty much no fault, it will. So that's the divide there. Now that's a situation where you really kind of have to look at individual situations. If you're dealing with somebody who's acting like that in a marriage where they've changed that dramatically, something's wrong, and it's time to look at some form of maybe medical attention. But
well, or counseling or something. Well, I just still remember that case from 2010 in France.
Well, we're not going to get into that. We're not, Karen. We're not.
Where
the
woman sued her ex-partner.
Yeah, it's almost 10 o'clock and it's off topic, and we're still getting more live or more super chats. So I'm going to continue on with them.
Okay, read them.
I've got several here. I've got 3 in a row from Chris Stewart. He gave us a total of $30, $10 for each super chat, and I'm just going to read them all. It's continued twice. He says, God, can you imagine what headaches maledom kinksters, especially those who fetishize male supremacy, would like to get really rough, as in bruising, who like to get really rough, as in bruising, have to deal with. It just wouldn't be worth it for the men. And there is literally nothing wrong, or nothing a woman who wants it could do to prove their trustworthiness. This was during the discussion on mandatory prosecution and no drop policies, because all it takes is a noisy neighbor or a bad decision made in the heat of the moment to completely destroy a man's life, no matter how loyal the fem sub usually is. And that is a good point. So you got somebody in a BDSM relationship, and their particular kink leaves marks. And how do you explain that to the cops? No, this isn't abuse, it's a kink. I asked him to do this. These are the tools I bought on my credit card to do this with. How do you stop the cops from prosecuting that? They don't want to go into to court with it necessarily. But if you're in a precinct where they have a mandatory arrest policy, and you're in a district where there is a mandatory prosecution policy and a no drop policy, they're stuck. They're going to have to go into court. The neighbor complains because there's loud noise. The sub is, yelling or whatever, or the dom is yelling or whatever, or there's something went too far, or they noticed bruises or burn marks or whatever, and all of a sudden the relationship is no longer permissible, even though it is completely 100% consensual, because the neighbor doesn't like it. Yeah, that's the situation we're in. And it's the
the Supreme Court of Canada will overrule that woman and her consent.
And they'll overrule the consent. Now, the only thing that I can advise in a situation like that is a documentation. If you've got a situation like that, if somebody's got a situation like that where they're in a relationship that they could tell their neighbor doesn't approve of their kinks, and their kinks are something that the neighbor could get them in trouble for, even though they're not necessarily acts that should be illegal. Like, if your kink involves getting burned, and I know that there are people that have that, document your everything. Document your consent. Document your purchase of what you use for that. Document everything. And if you have to go into court, be prepared to not be ashamed of your kink, because it's going to become public. It's going to make news, and you're going to have to publicly talk about, I do this because I like it, and it's not somebody else's business, and shame on them for trying to stop me. And that's basically what you got to do. We have Exploding Prinny gave us $5 and says, are the Badgers looking forward to playing with Nintendo brand cardboard? I don't get to play video games that much anymore. I don't know what you're talking about because I haven't read about it. And I don't know if it's a real thing or a meme. Sorry.
last video game I played was a game of that. It's like a Monopoly game, only it's Super Mario, and it's like Wall Street kind of stock buying and stuff. I forget what it's called.
Yeah,
I played it with my kids. I played it with my kids on my son's 15th birthday or something like that. So.
It's like I don't even do anything regularly anymore. The most I get to do now is a couple of flash games here and there. That they're the kind of thing that you can do a thing in it and then let it go for a day or two, and then do another thing in it and let it go for a day or two, or you can do a thing and let it run while you watch. I don't get to be a real gamer anymore. So, and it sucks because I miss it. But I don't mind too much because of the things that I am getting to do. Getting to be involved in this is huge. So somebody will have to explain
Agreed.
to me what that is, because I haven't even seen it on Twitter. Field of Bears gave us $5 and says the state is used as a weapon against men. What if feminists didn't have that option? If feminists didn't have that option, our society would be able to advance to the next level.
Women would have to bargain fairly with men. There would have to be an enforceable social contract between men and women, and it would have to be worth men's while to enter into that contract, and so women would have to make it worth it. That's really all there is. That
is what feminists are afraid will be the result of the men's rights movement. That is why they are afraid of us, because they don't want a fair bargain. Hoki Bukisa gave us $5 and says, I didn't want to get intimate with him, so I sucked his dick twice. Yeah, that was the story, wasn't it? That bad date. That just
but let's not forget, he served her white wine, and every wine snob knows white wine is the kind of wine that people who should be drinking beer drink. Mm-hmm. Just like Merlot is the kind of red wine that people who should be drinking, plebs who should be drinking white wine drink. So
Pinot Noir is where it's at.
So really, including the fact that he served her white wine and not red was a comment on the fact that he has no class, that he's some kind of jumped up guy who is really low rent, but, has unearned status, blah, blah, blah. That's the only thing that I can think of as to why that was included, was a diss in terms of his level of I guess, sophistication and all of that, and essentially trying to describe him as low rent and plebeian and classless and gauche and all of those other things, right?
Yeah, now, so there's a question for you in the chat. What kind of wine is for whiskey drinkers? That's from Yanober. I have that question myself, actually.
It's called Kentucky wine, and you brew it in your bathtub.
Okay. Well, I haven't done that. I don't think you want to brew anything in my bathtub right now. I haven't cleaned it in a while.
I have a bottle of wine called Apothic Inferno that's brewed in whiskey bottles that I happen to quite like, and I'm a Scotch drinker, so there you go. That's my suggestion.
And to be honest, I'm not really a wine drinker at all. And for a while, I had, like, my doctor was all, oh, you got to drink red wine for your heart, and so I found a Concord. It is actually a kosher Concord. It was the one that I ended up liking the taste of. That was sold at a grocery store. And I drank that for a while until I read somewhere that you can get exactly the same benefit from eating red grapes. And so I don't drink wine anymore. I eat red grapes and I drink my goddamn beer, and I'm fine with that. I also read that dark beer has sulfur in it that is good for your heart, so that's my alcohol for my heart. I drink dark beer, and that's it. But I'm not really, I guess I'm not sophisticated either. So
I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol for my heart. I drink it for my liver and my brain.
Well, I drink it because I like it, but I pick which ones I drink for healthy reasons, But except for when I want whiskey, and then I don't give a shit. But but yeah. So if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do it because I like it. There's no point in doing something that you don't like. If I'm gonna do something for my health, there's a gym down the street, and I can even walk there. Exercise is really good. So yeah. But in any case, I don't know. If I don't like it, I'm not going to drink it. And I don't see why it makes you sophisticated or unsophisticated to drink something because somebody else likes it. It seems to me that the least sophisticated thing you could do is follow the crowd and say,
pick
well,
on
I'm going to
somebody
do
else.
this because everybody else says this is the sophisticated thing to do. And I will develop
Yeah,
a
I'm
taste for
gonna
it because
drink-
everybody else says this is the... No, fuck you guys.
I'm-
If I
I'm-
like it, I'm
I'm
not
not-
drinking it.
I'm not going to drink this because Paul Giamatti in a movie said, I will not drink more Merlot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems pretty low rent to complain about a glass of wine that somebody else is buying for you. Like, way to be an ungrateful asshole.
Yeah, and it strikes
Yeah.
me personally as pretty dishonest for somebody to present this guy as an unsophisticated piece of shit because he served something that she considers should be a faux pas. Oh, well, it's rape because he's low rent. You know, once again, like that.
Well, but
The answer to
the
that
thing
is
too-
okay. Get up and leave. Call a
And
cab.
probably-
Go
yeah.
home. If you don't like the guy,
What-
don't spend time with him. But don't
What's
don't
re-
engage in an activity with him and then turn around later and lie about it and say
I know.
I was forced, I was coerced, I couldn't act on my own behalf. Poor me. Fuck you.
I know. It's so the whole thing is so ridiculous. I mean, particularly in light of the wine, because I'm fixated on the wine for some reason. He took her to an oyster bar, and you would normally pair white wine with seafood, and so his choice of wine was perfectly in keeping with where he was planning to take her for dinner.
There you go.
So, I mean, but it's like, like I look at it and I think, like I have had all kinds of disappointing sex in my life. A lot of it on brief or casual acquaintance. Okay, I've had sex that didn't lead to what I wanted it to lead to. I've had sex that meant more to me than to him, sex that meant more to him than to me, sex that got awkward, sex that got complicated, sex that that my friends and coworkers found out about and then they razzed me over it. Sex that I had when I was bored that turned out to be at least as boring as being bored, only a lot more work, right? I even had sex once where the condom broke and then I ended up in a small, tiny fucking town talking to a nurse that I know while I was getting tested for every STD in the book, explaining that the sex really wasn't worth all this trouble because it was pretty lame. Okay, and those were all my decisions.
Yeah, that's
Right?
that's my point. This is one of the most infuriating things about feminism. The way they lie about women's agency, and they talk as if they are trying to impart to the world that women have agency, that women's agency is the same as men's agency, and so on. And then they turn around and they pull this shit, this idea that a woman can make a solid choice. I am going to do this thing. I am doing this thing now. Reach out and participate in this thing. And turn around afterwards and say, but I was raped, because the reason that the woman made the decision was because she didn't want to confront something, well, that wasn't a real threat, or that wasn't a real compelling reason to cringe or away from, like, well, I don't want to deal with the inconvenience of calling a cab to leave this guy's place, and he obviously wants to have sex, so I'll just have sex with him so I can spend the night at his place. And then later, oh, well, he would have thrown me out in the cold. Poor me, I was raped. It just...
Excuses.
No, you weren't.
Excuses.
You weren't.
Seriously.
I had a beer, and now my consent is invalid. No, it's not. And that's another one. And I'm gonna go off on a tangent about this, because this is something that's bothered me. I've been arguing this particular topic since I had access to the internet. I've been arguing this particular topic online. Feminists try to make it out like contract law should cover this. And it really doesn't. And my argument for why contract law doesn't cover drunk sex, the thing that criminalizes signing a contract with a drunk person is not the act of signing the contract when consent was invalid, but the act of attempting to impose it after the consent was withdrawn. That's a condition that can't occur in a circumstance of drunk sex, because once the sex act is over, there's nothing to return or enforce. There's no act of imposing an agreement after the agreement has been withdrawn. There's only a mutual physical action that one party later decides was a mistake due to maybe compromised inhibitions. And taking an action due to compromised inhibitions and later regretting it is exactly like circumstances described in criminal law, not contract law. The act of applying contract law there is more analogous of the situation than as being more analogous of the situation than criminal acts is flawed, and its lack of consideration of the reasoning behind the involved laws. You can't treat something in the moment as if it happened later. It's not fact, it's not right, and it's not reason. And it'd be more like, and I hate the way people use drunk driving as their analogy for this. I would say it's more like getting into a drunken brawl. If I walk up and punch you in the face, I have just consented to getting into a fight with you because I hit you in the face. If you hit me in the face and I hit you back, I have just consented to getting into a fight with you because I hit you back. If you hit me in the face and I run away and you come after me and continue to hit me, then you're in a fight with me without me consenting to being in a fight with you. That's it. That's the fact of the matter. That's not contract. That's in the moment. That's how consent works. Okay? You do something to somebody. You have just consented to interacting with that person. And it doesn't matter if you're drunk or sober. And if that person's drunk, you know, it doesn't change anything either. It doesn't change what your consent is. If that person's male and you're female, it doesn't change what your consent is. Drunk sex is not rape. Taking advantage of someone who is actually incapacitated, passed out, they don't know where they are, they can't talk, they can't stand up straight, you know, that's a different story. But for Pete's sake, if you had a beer and you're a little bit tipsy, whether you walk up and kiss someone on the lips or stick your hand down their pants or punch them in the face, you have consented to interaction with them. And whatever you do after that is your choice, your action, your behavior, not somebody else's imposition on you. That's my take on it. So I'm going to go on to the next one. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and says, Murray in Rothbard will give you arguments about how negative rights are so much better for everyone. So that actually does sound like something I should read then. Independent Corex gave us $5 and says, in parentheses, just one parenthesis around the word MGTOW, thanks for all the help. Keep up the good work. We will go back to the hotel for coffee when you come back to the U.S. I'm in the U.S. And I'm in Dayton, Ohio. And then gave the coffee emoji, which I know is a reference to Coffeegate, to Elevator Gate. But everybody knows that I drink way too much coffee. So anyway, Joey Jojo gave us $2 and says, honestly, I hate that. I wish I had no sex drive. I mean, I don't know what that is in reference to because I don't know at what point this was.
I think it was probably when I was talking about the differences between male and female libido. Possibly,
quite possibly. Yeah, that makes sense. And unfortunately, that's nature. But Mark D. Atheist gave us $5 and says, Karen is now broke because of the constant astronomical condom bills. True story. I like the fact that he put astronomical in there, considering what you always tell us.
Okay, when I was dating, before I met my guy, I used to buy my condoms at Costco. You can get them in a tin of 64 for a very reasonable price. Durex condoms. And it's a tin. It's a tin. It's actually a nice tin that you can put on your nightstand and like keep your passport in and shit when all the condoms are gone.
Keep your passport in a condom tin.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Neat.
You know, or like your spare change, or like, you know, like random toiletries or something like that, right? It's a nice big tin. But yeah, that's what I used to buy when I was single and dating, but not anymore. So,
Well, hey, you're lucky. You're not allergic to latex. They're a lot more
That's
expensive
true.
if you are allergic to latex, and finding out that way that you're allergic to latex.
Oh, that would really suck.
Not fun.
Almost makes a hole in the wall. We'll just say that. And it's the really bad thing about it is, like, you don't find out necessarily immediately, like that at first
No, you
stroke,
find out
right?
later.
Because it's not constant contact and in the same exact spot, except at the very opening. So you end up with this situation where you're going along and things are feeling great, and then all of a sudden it feels like somebody lit a fire down there, and then, you know, poured gasoline on it, and maybe some fire ants, and you're like, holy fucking shit. And then you
Not
go through
fun.
the wall, and then you go
And
looking
then
for
you
the
were like, is
expensive
this
condoms.
some weird fucking variation on the cinnamon challenge?
No, and you're like, are we going too fast? Is it catching on fire? And like, holy shit. Nope. Latex allergy is a bad thing, especially on a mucous membrane.
And okay, I'm not gonna say it.
Yeah, but
'cause
now they have started making, and the bad thing is, like, the substitutes are not as flexible. So, but now they make they're starting to make silicone ones and everything, and they're better, but they're expensive, which also sucks. But at least there's an alternative.
Well,
so-
silicone is nicer anyway, because like I had to buy silicone pacifiers for all my kids because they couldn't stand the taste of latex.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
because
so
it just smells bad and it tastes bad. It's gross.
Yeah, and like, it's one of those things, like, how do you find out the only times you find out you have an allergy to something like that is at the dentist's office when they stick latex in your mouth because you got latex gloves, and they don't use those as much anymore because so many people have that allergy. And you,
Or
you
a
find
dental
out
dam or something.
yeah, or you find out with a dental dam or condoms, and boom, you've just put it on a mucous membrane or some other sensitive area, and it's just like it's not fun.
Getting
So
willies
just
over here.
like, if you don't feel bad about spending a shitload of money on condoms unless you're spending a shitload of money on non-latex condoms, because that's just no fun. Ziranx gave us $10 and says, saw this tweet today. Imagine if men viewed sex as something they can give to women rather than get from women. My reply, you'd assume he thinks he's God's gift to women. Never learned reciprocity. All I can think of is, all right, this person is the person who tweeted that has never actually had sex with a man.
I know my man's always trying to give it to me. So.
Well, the thing is, if men didn't view sex as something that they give to women rather than something that they get from women, the woman's orgasm would not be the most important part of the experience. And in every type of porn that involves women, the woman's orgasm is the most important part of the experience. And every relationship that I've been in, that's been that's been a very dominant thing in the sexual aspect of the relationship. It's always been important to the guy, and it's the reciprocity should be there. It should always be there. It's always been important to me, but I guess there are a lot of women out there who don't give a shit if he finishes as long as she does, and doesn't understand. The women don't understand that not going both ways is them seeing sex as something men should give to them, not men seeing sex as something women should give to men. Your orgasm is your experience, right? But it's important to your partner when you're a woman. It should be important to your partner when you're a man. She's got it backwards.
Well, I would say too with porn, right? 90% of the camera work is on the woman's face or her body. It's very much focused on what she's experienced.
Yeah. Well, there's women's orgasm compilations.
Yeah. And then the men often act as kind of a universal cock. It's it's kind of like they're a placeholder, and the woman is the center of the entire thing. So, you know, like,
well,
I don't understand this disconnect, right? Like between
a great example, actually, of one of the lies that feminists tell about women. You know,
well, it's an example of the lies that they tell about everything. Like sex is inherently reciprocal. It's inherently transactional. It is inherently two people who get together and they say to each other, "I'm going to give you pleasure."
Yeah.
Right? That's essentially what they do. And in return for the pleasure that I give you, I'd like something in return. And it might not be sexual pleasure. It's not always sexual pleasure that you get in return. You might get gratification because you've pleased your partner. You might get affection. You might get snuggles. You might get whatever, right? But you're getting something out of that. And so this, or if you're really cynical, you give him a blowjob and then take his credit card and say, "I'm going shoe shopping," and he's in a daze and goes, "Okay," right? You know, like a certain person that I know and is a friend of mine and whom I hope I have reformed to a significant degree over the years that I've known her. And turned her into a real human being instead of somebody who gives her guy a blowjob, takes his credit card, and announces she's going shoe shopping. Or puts the bag of kitty litter and the bag of potatoes on the bottom of the cart and walks out of the store without paying for them.
Oh,
and,
that type.
That's
No,
nice.
knowing that she can always just say it was an accident. Oops, I forgot they were there. Right? If she and I was like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, really?" And then like I gave her a big lecture, and then a month later she phoned me and said, "Thanks a lot. I just paid for kitty litter. I never asked you to make me have a conscience."
Oh well. That's, yeah. But
It's
the
truly
thing is,
terrible.
yeah, I run into that. You would be amazed at some of the shit people pull. I mean, everybody knows I worked in retail. It's just, and I'm sure your daughter has some similar stories. Just people pulling stupid shit. I used to have
people using their people using their young children to steal
and lying about it.
Of electronics.
And it's mostly women. But going on, we have Field of Bears gave us $2, and says Port has a really high ABV, but is really sweet. Then he gave us another $5 and says white wine also has a reputation for hitting harder. Well, it probably does, but that's not why I drink. I don't drink to get drunk.
But red wine turns my teeth blue. So.
Oh, that's fun.
That's not so great.
Got one last one here. Disillusioned Jelly says, "Are you guys done with the stream soon? You guys have distracted me from my thoughts, and I need to go take myself for a walk to find them again. Also, Allison, stop having kittens."
Take my dog with you.
Is that take my dog, please?
Take my dog with you and don't bring her back.
Oh, jeez, that's hilarious. But I would say, yeah. We are going to be done with this show soon. We just had a shitload of... you guys are awesome. Thank you a million times over for the numerous super chats. That's extremely flattering that we get that many. But it is that time of the night. Actually, it's a good 40 minutes or so past when I would normally try to start stopping the show.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, just to...
And now it's time to say
But I've got oh gosh, we got
Another one.
More. We got another one. Holy shit. Well, we can't end the show without one more. Disillusioned Jelly gave us five euros and says, "Gladly, Karen." So
yeah, take this fucking dog. You will regret it,
there
but
we are.
I will be glad.
Anyway, as I said at the show's beginning, my mind was blown when, upon witnessing legal tolerance for women's perjury in intimate partner violence cases against my friends, I realized how much society condones lies perceived to benefit women, and in particular when the woman's accusation itself is a lie. Then I heard arguments that intimate partner and sexual violence conviction rates affected by this tolerance for women's lies somehow proves men's malevolence. And I said, what is this shit? You know, what do you do when you're dealing with such an obvious lack of logic? What can you do? What are you going to deal with in this situation? It's and the way I likened it to the massive bullshit. That just, I've been stuck in that bullshit over and over and over again. And every single time, digging my way out each time has gotten easier and easier because of the tools that I've developed over the years. And the first need really is that shovel to dig your way through it and find your way back to solid ground. That's what I want to do with this show. I want people empowered to fight back against tolerance for these lies. The lies that are promoted and protected by that tolerance. Not just perjury in court, not just individual women's lies, but feminism's lies. In particular, I want people armed with the tools they need to fight back against women's lies, men being blamed for those lies, lies feminists tell about men and women, demands placed on men as a result of their being blamed for those lies. To provide our listeners with the tools to dig out of the bullshit, maybe even get the people around them questioning, why are we tolerating this shit? You want people aware that they don't have to tolerate a damn thing, because right here, we have a whole shed full of tools to work your way through all of it. Clean it out of the discussion and get on with our advocacy. Most of all, I want men who can assert their own truth without a fear of the lies that society facilitates women telling. If that sounds like something that you want more of, then please consider supporting me and my efforts in arming fighters, and support the Badgers at feedthebadger.com. And with that, I thank everyone for listening. I thank my co-hosts for doing this long show. And I thank everybody involved in making Honey Badger Radio happen, and making Badger Talk happen. And especially these poor guys that are going to have to go through and find all of the good parts of this long-ass show. Good night, everybody.